Hello and welcome. Uh, we are going to do a video on the Magic 8-Ball tutorial. This is an introduction to creating iOS applications using Xcode and Swift. Okay, so this is for beginners, like anybody just beginning that wants to make an iPhone app. This is a good place to start. So how are we going to do that? Well, this is for the ACS 3004 mobile application development class at the Dominican University in the Applied Computer Science program. So anybody in that course, this is the tutorial you should follow. Anybody outside the course, feel free to follow along. You can go to our GitHub/tech@du tech@du GitHub account, and you can find all of the course materials here. So I kind of zoomed in on this here. I'm going to go down to a repository here, and I'm going to search for this, Magic 8-Ball, right? Let me see. I'll just search Magic. Oh wait, Magic dash 8-Ball. Oh, there it is, right? Magic 8-Ball, right? So I'm going to click on the tutorial here, and this is the tutorial we're going to follow. Okay. Let me actually zoom out and zoom in this way, right? So the tutorial is pretty simple. It makes a simple single-page application in Xcode that will run on your iPhone, and you'll write the code in Swift using the Swift programming language. Okay. So here are the steps to the tutorial. It's pretty short. There's 6 steps. And here are our learning objectives. We're going to use the Xcode interface. We're going to use Interface Builder. And we're going to write code in Swift. And then we're going to run our app in the iOS simulator. I'm going to go to the first Getting Started page here. And in here, what are we going to build? This shows what we're going to build. We're going to build the Magic 8-Ball. So if you're not familiar, Magic 8-Ball was a plastic toy. It was a plastic sphere, and it had an 8 on the top, like an 8-ball you might find on a billiard table. And you would ask it a question. So you would say, Magic 8-Ball, what am I going to have for lunch today? And then you would flip it over, and it would give you an answer like signs point to yes. Okay? So, it had a random thing inside that generated a different answer every time. So we're going to build something like that in software. Okay, and you can read through the steps here. I'm going to gloss over some of the stuff because I want this tutorial with the video to illustrate the things that are hard to illustrate in the written instructions. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next step here, new project. So this is where we're going to create a brand new project using Xcode. Okay, so let me actually, instead of reading the tutorial here, let's go get Xcode and actually start our project. So I'm going to open up Xcode. Xcode is the developer tool provided by Apple. So Apple gives Xcode to the community to make apps, and it's the software that they use for building the apps that come on the iPhone by default. Okay, so this is the starting screen here, and it should show you a list of your previous projects in the right column, and then you can click one of these buttons here to do something like create a new project, clone an existing project, open an existing project. Okay. If you don't see this menu, and sometimes you won't, it'll be closed. You can do all those things from the menu. So if I go up here to the menu, I can choose File, New, and then I can say New Playground, New File, New Project, right? And this is what we're going to do. We're going to choose New Project here. In the instructions there, they have you click this first option in that Getting Started box, right? But I'm just going to do it this way. File, oops, I clicked on Safari. Let me go back. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to choose File, and I want to choose New Project. Okay, and it's going to ask me some questions about setting up this new project. Okay, so first of all, when we get to the New Project dialog box, here I'll zoom out on that, right? So it looks like this. Let me zoom in again, right? At the top here, there's some tabs, right? And so we can choose multi-platform, iOS, macOS, watchOS, tvOS, right? We're going to choose iOS. So make sure you're on iOS here. And then it says, what kind of application do you want to make, right? And they give us some starter code, right? So there's app, document app, game, augmented reality app. Sounds pretty interesting, right? We're going to choose the first one here, app. Okay, so you're on iOS and you've chosen app. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go down to the bottom corner here and you're going to click Next. And now you're going to give your project a name. So I'll name my project Magic. Actually, I'll just call it 8-Ball. There we go, 8-Ball. And you can set the team here. And if you don't have a team on there, that's okay. You can just leave that blank. You need to give it an organization identifier. So for right now, you can put anything here, but this is for publishing your app, and every app has to be published under a unique organization, right? So on the App Store, only apps by that organization are recognized by that organization, right? So you can't publish, like you couldn't publish an app under Facebook, for example, right? That is what this is doing for us, right? So for right now, you can type anything in here, but usually this should be a unique identifier for your organization. So what's common here is we use a reverse domain name. Okay, so you can type, your domain name, com.mydomain.com, right? Okay, and so that will give us the identifier here. And this is the next step here is very important. Be sure to choose interface storyboard. There's two choices, right? And maybe we'll talk about Swift UI in a later tutorial, but right now we're doing storyboard. Okay, so we're going to use storyboard for this tutorial, and then you're going to choose language as Swift. And the other option is Objective-C, which was the older original language we used for building iOS apps. But Swift is kind of the new language. It's a lot easier to work with and learn. So we're going to choose Swift. And then don't check these boxes here because we're not going to use tests or core data. So next, we're going to click the Next button. And then it's going to ask us, hey, where do you want to save this project? So I'm going to put my project in the ACS 3004 notes folder. That's where I have my class notes, right? And I'll click Create. And so it creates a new folder there. And then it puts a bunch of files in the folder. So for fun, let's go to the folder. I'm going to go there right now and take a look. So you can see here's the 8-Ball folder that I created, and when I look inside, I see this 8-Ball project file. Okay, so there's the 8-Ball project. Let me make this a little bit bigger, right? It's .xcode project, okay? And then there's an 8-Ball folder, and this shows me all the files that are in that project. So a project in Xcode is organized in a folder, and it has an Xcode Xcode project extension on it, and this is a special file that organizes all of your code. Okay, so remember these names here: app delegate, assets, XC assets, base project, info plist, scene delegate, and view controller. We don't actually need to edit any of these except for view controller for this project, and then we're actually going to edit this thing in here called main storyboard, but we'll do that through the interface, so you won't actually have to edit this file directly. But remember these files because we're going to see them in the Xcode interface, okay? So here I've zoomed out of the Xcode interface here, and let me kind of move this around a little bit so I can see these things side by side. And what you'll see here is that I have all of these same files and the same structure in the Xcode interface. So you can see I've got app delegate, and then I've got app delegate over here, and then I've got scene delegate, and we see scene delegate here. Okay, so the Xcode interface on the left column shows us a list of files, and actually the left column can show a lot of different things. If you're not on the File tab here, you'll see something different, right? So you can see it shows us something different in each one of these. But usually what you're going to be doing is you're going to be working in this File tab, and for this project you'll always want to be in the File tab. So if I click on the File tab, you can see all the files, and if you don't see them, maybe one of these folders is closed. So you can open up the folder by clicking on the little triangle, right? Okay, so let's tour the Xcode interface for a moment, and what you're going to see here is on the left column we're going to see our files, right? And this is like, you can think of this as this is what you want to work on. Okay, so you're going to choose what you want to work on in the left column, and then you're going to work your way to the right. Okay, so right now we're choosing the Xcode project file. That's what this is, right? And then over here I can see all the information that's stored in the Xcode project file, and there's a bunch of tabs here, so we can go to signing capabilities, resource, resource tags, info, build settings, etc. right? And then on the right column here, this gives us information about the thing that's selected in the left column. So, when I select the 8-ball project, you can see that it says identify it and type, right? It says name 8-ball project, right? And then, location and project document, right? It gives us some other information too, okay? And there's a couple tabs here to look at this information in different ways, right? Okay, if I work my way down the list right here and I click on, let's say, View Controller, you can see that, it lists some code here. So this is like my Swift code, and I can type code in there and, add to my project, right? And then over here, the options change because this is related to this Swift View Controller file, right? So it says identity and type, and then it says name, viewcontroller.swift. That's the name of this file, right? Okay, so just keep that in mind. So generally what you want to do is you want to select the thing that you're going to work with in the left column. You want to edit the thing in the middle, and then you're going to get information about the thing on the right. Okay? Okay, great. So what are we going to do? We're going to build the magic 8-ball, right? So let me zoom out a little bit here, make my window a little bit wider. And before we actually build the 8-ball app, let's talk about like how you're going to work, right? So your workflow is basically going to be, finding the thing that you want to edit here, making your changes in the middle column, and then you'll want to see the changes appear and see what they look like on your phone. And you can test on your actual phone, but Xcode also provides a simulator for the phone. So we can test with the phone in a simulation on the desktop. So let's try that out. So let's imagine this is our app right here and we want to test it. And if I zoom in a little bit here and we look at the upper corner here, you can see there's this play button. So clicking this play button opens up the simulator, okay? But before we open up the simulator, let's look over here and you can see that I've got 8-ball and then it says iPhone 14 Pro. And if I click on this, I get a little menu and it asks me like which version of the iOS device do you want to choose? So I can choose iPhone SE, iPhone 14 Pro Max, 14 Pro, 14 Plus, 14, iPad Mini, iPad Pro. They're all the regular iOS devices are here, okay? And I guess you can add additional ones. So if you want to make your app, support like an older phone, you can probably load up one of those older phones. But these are the currently available phones, right? I'm going to leave this on the iPhone 14. Sometimes it takes a moment for the iOS simulator to launch. I've already launched it earlier just so I didn't have to wait while I was doing the video. So you can see it down here on the dock, right? I already have it here. I'll hide it for the moment, right? And I'm going to run my app. So I'll click the play button and it'll say building. It goes through the process of building the app and then it opens it in the simulator and the simulator comes to the front. Now the simulator is just like the phone. So if we look at the simulator closely, it's got a button on the right side and it's got 3 buttons on the left side, right? So just like the phone, okay? It's got the little, I forget what they called that thing here, but it's got the black hole, we'll call it, right? Okay. It's got the time, it's got the battery indicator, it's got this thing at the bottom. You can swipe up, you can click on the home screen. If you need to do something that you can't do, oops, I clicked on messages, I guess. I'm gonna say okay to that, right? If you want to just go to the home screen or do something with the phone that you can't do here with the interface, right? Or that's difficult to do with the interface here, you can go to the menu up here. So right now I'm in the simulator. So you can see it says simulator. And if I go to the device menu, it lets me do things with the device. So I can go to the home screen, right? And now you can see oops, I scrolled too far there. You can see I've got the simulator open here and we've gone to the home screen. And I can swipe to the left or swipe to the right, and view things on the home screen, right? I can go to the settings here, I can open up settings, right? And you can set options here. So maybe your app needs a login or something and you might have to go to settings to do that, right? I'm going to do Command Shift H and that's like hitting the home button, right? Or swiping up from the bottom, okay? And then I'm going to go back here, and you can see earlier I made a Magic 8-Ball app, so it's sitting on the home screen, and this is the 8-Ball app that we just created. It doesn't have an icon yet, right? So it gives us this default icon, right? But this is our app, and if I tap on that, then it opens up again. And now currently our app doesn't do anything, so it just shows a blank screen because that's all we've done, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this in the background, and we are going to start building the Magic 8-Ball app, right? So what are we going to do here, right? Um, First of all, every view that you see on the iPhone, so anytime you're in an app and there's a screen or a window, right, you are looking at a view, and that view is managed by a view controller. Okay, so there's a view controller at the base of every view. And the app that we created, the default app, gives us an iOS app that has a single view. And they give us this viewcontroller.swift file to control that view. So this is a class, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about the Swift language, but basically the code starts at the word class here, and everything that's contained in the class starts at the curly brace here and goes to the matching curly brace at the bottom. And you can see when I move the cursor past here, this one kind of highlights in yellow, right, to show me that these two are paired up. And then right here, I've got a function called, called viewDidLoad, right? So this is a function that runs when the view loads, okay? Right? Kind of makes sense what the name says, right? And you can see that this function starts here with this curly brace and then ends here. And you can see when I move the cursor past these, this other curly brace highlights, so I know that these are paired, right? So I bring this up not not to confuse anybody, but to point out that when we add code to this view controller, we're going to do it between this curly brace and the one at the bottom, okay? And so we're going to come back to this in a moment. We have to add some interface elements, and then we can put some code here to control those interface elements, okay? So let me zoom out. So how do we build an interface in our app, right? We're going to go to this file over here called main.storyboard, okay? So storyboard is sort of a graphical editor that lets us create the interface by dragging and dropping items into the window here. So when I click on storyboard, you will see a simulation of the phone, right? So this looks just like our phone that we were working on, right? But this is interface builder, right? The arrow right here means the starting point. You can actually drag this and put it on another view. And in the storyboard here, if you build your app, you might even build like a tree view that shows a bunch of different views and what happens in each of those views. Our app is going to have a single view, right? And it's going to start with that view, so the arrow needs to point to this one view here, okay? And you can see a little tree view here that kind of shows us what we have. And you see at the top of the list here, there's view controller scene, and then underneath it, it says view controller, and this represents the file here, view controller, okay? And it's the view that we see in the phone simulator here, right? Or this is not really the simulator's back here. This is the simulation or the mock-up. Let's call this one the mock-up, right? This is the mock-up of our iOS app. Okay, so where are all these interface elements? Well, let's go find them, right? If you go to the top here, there's a little plus button, okay? So there's a little plus button, and it says library. And you can actually get the library on one of the menus here. Editor, show layout. I forget, to be honest, I forgot where that is right now. It's under edit, library. I swear there's one in here. It'll say library. Well, anyway, just forget it because we can click the button. But you can look for it. It's on there somewhere. I'm just not seeing it right now. Okay? So you can open it up that way. I think there's a keyboard shortcut. It's probably like Command L or Command Shift L, right? I'm going to click on this, right? And it opens up a pane that has a list of user interface elements. So if you scroll down here, you'll see all of the interface elements that you can use on iOS, right? And you can even make your own custom interface elements. Okay? But these are the ones that are default, and they're given to us by UIKit, which is a library of code that Apple uses to build iOS applications, right? So what are we going to do here? There's a lot here, and we can spend the whole term exploring all this stuff. But for right now, let's just get something done. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the label. Okay, so label is basically like a single line of text. You can make it multi-line, but it's meant for like a short text snippet. Okay, and they have a text area thing for larger text blocks also, right? And an input field for inputting text. But we're going to use the label here. So I'm going to just drag the label into the window, right? So I just clicked and dragged. And you can see as I drag in here, it gives me some guides to say like if it's in the center or whatever, right? So I'll just drag it and I'll place it right there, okay? There we go. And now let's modify this interface element. And if you, actually before we do that, let's take one more look over here. If we look in the tree view here, you can see that I've got my view controller, there's a view, there's the safe area, and then I see the label that I just added. So if you're having trouble selecting the label here with the cursor, you can always click on the label up here and it's the same thing, right? And you can even right click and get a menu about the label with some things to do with it, right? So I'll just select the label there. And let me scroll over to the right side here. And we're gonna, like I said, the right column is giving us information about the currently selected item. So when I select the label on the right column here, you can see information about the label. So this first tab here is tells us about the identity, right, and the file, right? This tells us about the history of the item, right? This tells us about the help. So this is like quick help menu. So it tells us interface, UI label, its subclasses UI view, and it tells us about you can configure the overall appearance, blah blah blah. You can open this up in the documentation, right? And then this is the class inspector or identity inspector, okay? And so if we need to deal with that, we can go here. And what's important to us right now is this one. It says show attributes, right? So the attribute inspector lets us set all of the attributes or properties of the label. So this is things like the color, the size, the font family, okay? And then a whole bunch of other things. And you can see this menu is pretty long. Okay, it scrolls even, right? There's like a lot of options there. Okay, so let's play with this for a minute. So I like this label, but if we're looking at the tutorial project here, I think actually we're already up to adding UI here. So I'll go to adding UI, and they're gonna want us to make this label look like this, right? And you can read in here, and it'll tell you what some of the settings are. I forget what they are here, right? It says system 15, right? What does it say here? I forget. I'm just going to do it myself, right? So let me zoom in on this, right? And let's make some changes. So I've got the label here, and what I want to do is go to the font option, right? And if you click the button, you can bump the font size up by 1 point. If you click this little T, you can get a menu, and it gives you the Apple system font style. So if I click on font here, I can choose like caption 2. I can choose headline. You can choose large title, right? So you can choose. These are the default styles that are used by all the iOS applications, right? So it's like these are the styles that were generated at Apple. If you click the little button there, you can also choose custom at the top here, and then you can just type in a font size, like I'll do 48 pixels. Maybe that's too big. Let's do 32, right? And then you can choose the font family. I'm going to leave it at Helvetica, and then you can choose the font style to make it bold, right? And then you can click done, okay? And if you want, up at the top here it says label, right? So you can change the text here. You can say try again later, right? And now it says try again later, okay? There's a lot of options. You can choose alignment, so I can say let's make the text center aligned, right? Let's make it left aligned or right aligned, right? Okay, I'm going to choose center for now. And I'll leave these other options up for you. You can also set the color. You can give it a text shadow or font shadow, right? Or a shadow, right? There's a whole bunch of options, okay? Right, so we're going to leave it at that. And now let's move on and make a button. So I'm going to click on the plus button at the top here, the library, and you can see I've got a few buttons. So there's the button here, there's the gray button, there's the tinted button, and then there's the filled button. I think I'm going to grab the filled button even though the tutorial uses the regular button, right? So I'll grab the filled button there, and then I'm going to drag it down near the bottom of the screen. Something like that, right? And there's my application. So if we wanted to test this and see what it looked like in the simulator, we can go back and click the play button again. Okay, it's going to say like, hey, you know, you already have an app in the simulator. Do you want to overwrite that one and replace it with the new build? Right, because that was we built this app and then installed it on the phone, the simulator, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, yeah, let's replace that app. And then it takes a moment to build and compile, and then here we are, and it says try again later and button, right? Now, your things may be off alignment because we haven't done anything to adjust the position and size of these things based on the size of the phone. So if the phone in the storyboard here was a different sized phone from the phone that you are testing on, then these might move around a bit because the phones have different sized screens, right? So this is, you know, an absolutely positioned element, right? So it's always going to be, you know, this distance from the left edge and this distance from the top. And if the phone screen changed size, then, you know, the center point's still going to be the same distance from the left and the top, right? But if this edge was a little narrower, it would appear that this had moved to the right, okay? But don't worry about that. We're going to talk about that later. They have a whole system set up for that called constraints, right? But anyway, so there's our app so far, right? Okay, so what do we need to do next, right? In order to control user interface elements with your Xcode app or your iOS application, we need to have a connection in our view controller to the interface elements that you created in Storyboard. Okay, so this is like a really important step, and it's probably the most confusing thing about working with Interface Builder, maybe. Okay, so how are we going to do that? How are we going to make a connection between the label, the button, and then notice I'm not seeing the files here, so I got to click the file button there, right? And our view controller, okay? So somehow I got to get a connection between Storyboard and this view controller, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to show both the view controller and Storyboard side by side. And to do that, you're going to hold the Option key. I don't know if you can hear me, but I just pressed the Option key. I got my finger on it, right? And then I'm going to click on Storyboard. Okay, so I clicked on main.storyboard. And what this does is it opens up a second editor window. So you can see there's two windows here. So I got my view controller here, and I've got Storyboard over here. Okay? And it's a little hard to see on my screen here. I'm going to make that a little bit narrower, but there's my interface that I created, right? And here's my code view, right? So I've got my storyboard there. And then remember that this is the view controller, and remember what I said about the curly braces here. So this is where the class begins, class view controller, and the first curly brace is here, right? And the closing curly brace is at the bottom. And what I want to do is add a couple extra lines in between here, and then I'm going to drag into the window down here, okay? And what I want to do is create an action for this button, okay? So to do that, I'm going to hold the control key. So did you hear that? I'm holding down the control key, and then I'm going to click on the button, hold the mouse down, and drag. And as I drag like this, there's a little blue line. And when I'm outside the class, nothing happens. But as soon as I get inside the class here, like actually the menu showed up. Let me do that again, because it actually worked the first time, right? Let me do it again. Oh yeah, you see right there it says, hey, it shows me this little menu, and it says insert action outlet or outlet collection, right? So I want to see that, and then I'm going to let go, and it's going to give me this little menu, right? And what we're doing is we're going to create an action. So buttons, when you tap on them or interact with them, so an interaction with an element is an action, okay? Right? And what we're going to do is we're going to handle that action here. Okay, so essentially we're going to write a function that is called when you tap on the button. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that this says action. Object that we're targeting is view controller, right? So this should be our view controller file. It should say view did load here and view controller up above, right? View controller, right? Okay. And then you're going to give your action a name. And the name you give it has to be a name that is valid for a variable or a function, right? So I'm going to call this tap button. How about that, right? Okay. And then it says type, and we can choose any is fine, and then event right here. So now you can interact with things in different ways, right? So if you think about tapping the screen, your finger makes contact with the screen, your finger can move around on the screen still in contact, and then you can break contact with the screen. So that's how a touch interaction works. Those are the pieces of it. It's like makes contact, moves, and then breaks contact, okay? And then we can turn those into interactions that are more complex, like rotation or pinch and zoom and things like that, right? And what we're going to choose down here is this event is called touch up inside. So touch up inside is where you make contact with an element and then you break contact and your finger's still in the area of that element, right? You didn't drag out of the bounds of the element, okay? Right? So we're going to choose touch up inside, and you can see there's a whole list here. Did end on exit, touch down, touch canceled, right? Touch drag enter, right? Touch drag exit, right? We're going to choose touch up inside, okay? And then you can leave this arguments as sender, right? And then we're going to click connect, okay? Now, like I said, this is probably the most confusing thing about the Xcode or not Xcode, but like interface builder and making apps, right? Actually, um, there's maybe some more confusing stuff, but this is pretty confusing. Okay, so you can see I've got this new function here called with this special @id action in front of it. So this is a special function that comes from interface builder. So this is a regular Swift function. Okay, so we got a regular Swift function there, right? Let me just move this out of the way now. Right, so this is just regular old-fashioned Swift. Well, not old-fashioned, but right? And then it's got this special word in front of it that says @ib action. So @ib action, this special word says that this action is going to be defined or connected to something in interface builder. So the IB is for interface builder, right? That's what we have over here in the right side, okay? Right, so just know that that's for interface builder. It's got a little dot here. You see the dot? So if it's connected to something in Interface Builder, the dot will have a little, or the circle will have a little dot inside. And you can see when I hover over it, the button in Interface Builder becomes highlighted. So keep your eye on this as I hover over, maybe I'll zoom in on this a little bit. So as I hover over the dot here, you can see that this kind of highlights, right? Okay? So just keep that in mind, because if something happens, like if you disconnect this button, and you can do that on the connections inspector, right? So if we go to connections inspector and I see here, you can see touch up inside is attached to tap button function in view controller, right? So it tells me that, right? And if I click this little X, you don't have to do that. I'm going to break it and then fix it, right? So if I click that little X, you can see there's no actions here on this button, right? So my button right there is selected. I'm seeing all the actions and there isn't any. And when I look over here, this little dot is missing. So it means that this guy's not connected to anything. And that can happen, like as you're working, you can accidentally break a connection, right? So just keep your eye on that, and it's easy to fix, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag from the little dot. So if I have this IB action here, we actually could have written this first, right? So if we have this, I'm going to drag from here. Notice I get that little line, like a little rubber band, and I'm going to drag to the button, right? And then now it's connected again, right? So I see here in the connections inspector, I see touch up inside, view controller, tap button, and then over here you can see the little dot again, and when I hover over it, the button becomes highlighted, okay? So This is an IB action. So an IB action is for an interaction, like if you tap on something or swipe or interact with some user interface element, it's going to be an IB action. Okay? So next step, right? The other thing we need is we need an IB outlet. So an IB outlet references something in the interface that we want to connect with and set properties on while our app runs. So for example, like the label right here needs to change the text like when you tap the button. So we're going to tap the button. It's going to, we're going to ask a question, you're going to tap the button, it's going to give us an answer, and the answer will appear in this label. And to do that, we need to replace the text in the label with the new answer, right? And so we need an outlet to do that. So an outlet lets us change the properties or modify something, right? So let's make an outlet. Usually what I like to do is I like to put the outlets at the top and I put the actions at the bottom. So I'm at the top here still inside the class. So I added a couple extra lines here above view controller or view did load, right? Or inside view controller but above view did load. And what I want to do right here is I want to add an IB outlet, okay? So to do the IB outlet, we're going to do the same procedure. I'm going to hold the control key, right? And then click on the label and drag into the view controller, okay? And you can see it says insert outlet or outlet collection, right? So I'll let go. And then now it's going to give me another menu here. And it says connection type is outlet. So let's make sure that says outlet. And you can give it a name. I'm going to call it, how about my label, right? Or you can call it anything you want, right? So we'll call it my label, and it says type is UI label. So that should match the type of the item, right? And then you can do storage is weak. We'll get into that later. You can ignore that for now. And then you're going to click connect. And then you can see we have the same thing, right? There's a little dot here inside a circle. And when I hover over it, the label on the right column here becomes highlighted. Okay? Right? So the label right there is highlighted when I hover over the dot. And again, if the dot was broken, we could connect it by dragging from here onto the label. Okay? So now here, if we look carefully, you can see we've got at IB outlet, weak, and then it says var. Okay? So just ignore this stuff for now, but know that what you did here is you just defined a new variable called myLabel with a type of UI label. Okay? And then it's got this special IB outlet and weak because the label is being assigned, like this UI label, the value that we assign to the myLabel variable is coming from storyboard. Okay? So the label is coming from, or the variable myLabel is being assigned its value from storyboard. Okay? So that's why it's got this IB outlet. So storyboard is also called interface builder. So we're getting the value from interface builder. That's why it says IB, right? Okay, so let's try something now, right? Let's, you can follow the rest of the tutorial. This pretty much is the hard part, right? Is getting these IB actions set up and then knowing what to do when they break. Okay, so but how do we use this, right? Well, let's try something. So I'm going to go to my action down here just for fun. And what I want to do is I want to set the value of my label to something new when you tap the button, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, the code inside this function is only going to run when we tap the button, right? So what I'll do is I'll say my label dot text, right? So that's the text property, so that's the inner text that we see here, and I'll set it to something else, like maybe I'll do hello world, right? That's kind of your classic programming, beginner assignment, right? The very first thing we always do is hello world. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to stop I'm going to go up to the top here. I'm going to stop the simulator, and then I'm going to run the simulator again. And this is going to compile our app with the new changes that we made, and then open it in the simulator on the desktop. So there it's building. And here it is. Oh, it says try again later. I'm going to tap the button and it says hello world. So our app is working, right? So now we're making progress, right? We started with a blank app. Now we have an app with an interface, and now we have an app with an interface that, does some very simple interaction, but it is working, right? It is doing something, right? So let me stop the video here, and you all can continue with the tutorial and follow the instructions, and I hope that covers anything that was missing here and kind of shows you or illustrates some of the things that are described, okay? And good luck with your projects. Feel free to comment or send me a message if you have any questions on this, okay? And thanks for watching.